Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video, and I have been off for a few days because I've been very ill and I'm still not 100% better. I mean, I'm not better at all really, but I don't know, 3 days off was enough for me, so I just thought, you know what, even though I'm still sniffling, still coughing, I want to get back to reactions. And yeah, we're going to continue where we left off pretty much, and I just saw this pop up. Infographic show reactions seem to sometimes get blocked and stuff, so I don't know what the chances are of this being able to be posted onto YouTube, but fingers crossed it is. And yeah, the video is US World War III plan, and obviously these videos are like speculation. They're not set in stone. They're just, I guess, speculation from this channel's perspective. But yeah, it's always interesting to see these kinds of topics and these kinds of videos because yeah, you just see the possibilities of what the reaction would be. Fingers crossed there's no World War III happening anytime soon because I mean, we don't want that to happen for many reasons, but yeah, we're going to jump into the video. Hopefully you're going to enjoy. Links are in the description to my Patreon if you want to see some more of my reactions. But yeah, hopefully from now on I can start reacting back to the daily videos because yeah, the last few days it's been rough and I'm not feeling 100% better, but I do feel a bit better overall. So yeah, we're going to jump into this and see what the plan is.
Russia's on the warpath, and if successful in Ukraine, is unlikely to stop there. Lithuania, with EU support, has shut off the flow of military and economic material to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, triggering a threat of invasion by Russia in retaliation. A world away, China flexes its muscles as it threatens the United States and their continued support for Taiwan. Fears of World War III are growing by the day, and the United States is taking them very, very seriously. Before we discuss how the U.S. is preparing for the Third World War, first we need to know what its potential enemies are doing. China has long been preparing for a confrontation with the U.S. as it seeks to become the world's dominant superpower. Currently, China falls short of the qualifications for a global superpower, qualifications which only the U.S. fills at the moment. But with its dizzying economic and military growth, it might be less than a decade before the Chinese Communist Party can project power all over the world. China's preparations for a showdown with the West include dislodging the United States as the most important economic power in the world. It also has safeguards to its own economic interests in the wake of economic warfare versus the US. And
it is just so insane how China just flipped the switch like that and it just suddenly became so wealthy. Obviously, I guess it's helped by so many people being in the country. There's so many different ways to make money, right? But what, 50 years ago, China was, I mean, I don't know, maybe a bit longer ago, but even maybe less time than that. Like, it was a very, very poor country, and then it just flipped the switch. In a few decades, it became the second richest country in the world. And obviously, I don't know how it is the GDP per person. I don't know the sort of the levels of that because I'm sure there's a lot of poor people in certain places in China, but it is crazy how it just changed like that over a few decades.
And to achieve this aim in 2013, it launched the Belt and Road Initiative. This massively ambitious plan included building new land and sea trade routes all over the world to connect China economically with nations all the way from Europe to Africa. To achieve this, the nation has not just invested in its own infrastructure, but in building trade infrastructure in other nations as well. However, China's partnership with host nations is more often than not extremely predatory. They offer economic loans to build massive projects that promise economic prosperity, like seaports and rail yards. However, the terms of those loans often dictate that Chinese companies must be hired to do the construction, leaving few jobs for locals. Interest rates on the debt traps is often so high that a poor third world nation is guaranteed to default. Included in the penalties for defaulting are clauses such as China owning exclusive rights to the infrastructure it builds for terms as long as a century. It is in effect a modern version of soft colonialism. China's plan is to have heavy influence in the trade of goods throughout Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, putting it in a very strong position to dictate geopolitics in its ever-growing sphere of influence.
I mean, it's smart in terms of what China want to achieve. It makes sense, but when you look at it from a neutral perspective, it's quite depressing because obviously wherever they're doing it, whether it's a country in Africa or a country in Asia, say I don't know what country, just a low-income country, they're gonna accept it because they've got the possibilities of giving jobs to people from their country and improving everything in general in the country. More jobs. I mean, I guess the more jobs there are, the better standard of living and stuff. But that's not how it's gonna completely be because they're in control. They've built it. They own all that stuff, and now they're gonna get it all repaid, but in a lot more money because, I mean, it's a loan repayment, and you know how loan repayments are. You don't actually end up paying anywhere near what you've received in the first place.
China's next preparation for war with the U.S. includes securing its vulnerable trade routes through the South China Sea. and the very valuable oil and natural gas deposits in the region, as well as the remaining rich fishing grounds. This effort began with the construction of artificial islands in 2013, which continued unopposed despite an international ruling by the World Court in The Hague.
So they're making fake islands to claim that the land around it or the ocean around it. Hello? Alright, where was I?
Ruling by the World Court in The Hague that such island building and claims to economic exclusion zones around them were illegal. Foreign pressure also failed to stop China from stealing claims to oil supplies by neighbors such as Vietnam, or of using its coast guard to bully and intimidate the merchant and fishing fleets of other nations out of their own territorial waters. These islands have now become heavily fortified military installations, which include modern missile defenses, runways long enough for long-range attack aircraft, and an ever-growing network of surveillance assets, all geared for one purpose: detect, track, and destroy the U.S. Navy. Further preparations have included the addition of dozens of new ships to the People's Liberation Navy, which is now officially the largest in the world. Recently, China's second aircraft carrier came online, and in a few years will be ready for battle, greatly enhancing the CCP's reach in all the important sea and air domains. With Russia's increased belligerence in Europe, there's a serious concern that the two nations might partner up in an attempt to turn...
For sure. If there was a war, they would definitely be on the same side. It would be these two, North Korea. I can't think on the top of my head, but there will be a few pretty powerful militaries that would definitely join forces for sure.
Turn the current US-led world order on its head. Despite China's increasing capabilities, it still does not have the power to defeat the US in a one-on-one confrontation, and it might hope to split the US attention by partnering with Russia, thus forcing America to choose fighting between China in the Pacific or Russia in Europe. For decades, the United States maintained a policy of fielding a powerful enough military to fight and win two simultaneous wars against near-peer adversaries. However, with China's rapid ascension, this has become officially impossible without bankrupting the US, and thus America has been forced to accept that it may only be able to defeat one near-peer adversary at a time. The question is, how is the US preparing to do that, given the increasing likelihood of China and Russia starting a third world war? First, the situation in the Pacific might seem dire with China's numerically superior navy, but the real measure of naval power is not the number of vessels, but in the number of battle force missiles. These are the number of missiles that both navies can bring to bear against each other. The US maintains around 10,000 missiles versus the PLAN's estimated 2,000. Though those numbers have changed and will continue to change as China fields larger vessels and both navies shift in composition. It's estimated that by 2030, China might have closed the gap in battle force missiles to 2/3 of US capabilities. The US's first line of defense against China is the place that's likely to be ground zero for World War III, Taiwan. The small island democracy broke away from the mainland after the nationalists were expelled by the communists in the aftermath of World War II. Since then, the former dictatorship has become a vibrant democracy that has refused to reunify and put themselves under control of the Chinese Communist.
And I bet the country's doing so much better since this. I bet Taiwan is doing so much better as a country as a whole. Because since the dictatorship was ended and now there's actual freedom, you know? I bet it's such a completely different life for them.
Party. Securing Taiwan is not just important for the ever-intensifying global clash between authoritarianism and democracy, but also for very important political and economic reasons. Firstly, Taiwan produces around 50% of the world's semiconductors after US companies ceased production at home due to expense. Semiconductors are important for every single gadget in your life. The global economy quite literally runs on them, and they've become as valuable as a commodity as gas and oil. China
I've done a whole video focused on that, and it's crazy the importance of Taiwan in that situation.
itself produces between 25 and 30% of the world's semiconductor supply. So if China were to take Taiwan, it would now be in control of 3/4 of the global semiconductor supply. This would allow China to effectively shut down the economy of any nation that disagrees with it by simply barring the sale of semiconductors to it, giving China incredible power to further control global affairs and reducing the West's ability to oppose its authoritarianism. Taiwan is also politically important, as it makes up part of what's known as the First Island Chain. This is a chain of islands that extends from Japan to the Philippines and acts as a very physical barrier to the expansion of Chinese influence in the Pacific. If China were to take Taiwan, it would not just break this carefully orchestrated containment strategy, but allow China to effectively neuter Japan's ability to resist it. With aircraft and ships stationed off Taiwan, China could target Japan's lines of communication and trade routes that cross the Pacific and hem the nation in, forcing it into subservience under threat of economic starvation. If China takes Taiwan, the U.S. commitments to defend the Philippines and Japan would be made much more difficult, if not impossible. To defend Taiwan, the U.S. has inked several deals, selling the nation advanced weapon systems ranging from fighter aircraft to air and missile defenses.
Then what if China takes control and then they've got all this stuff as well? That would be the worst case scenario. They've got all these things that the US sold to Taiwan, all these aircrafts and all these defense systems. If Taiwan gets taken over, then that's all been given to China now. So I mean, shit, it's crazy, but I don't know the chances of Taiwan being invaded in the next few years, and maybe policies will change by that point, and the US will be. I don't know what I could really say, but like there will just be more defense for Taiwan then. But maybe they're at the limits of the defense they can have now. Because if you think about it, China's a massive country that's so rich. Taiwan is a small island off China. I mean, I assume it's a pretty wealthy country, but that's in comparison to its size, not to superpowers like China, even though it's not considered the superpower, but a rich ass country like China. So yeah, I mean, it'll definitely need some sort of protection. I don't know if there's any other countries that protect Taiwan, or if it's just the US solely. But yeah, it's an interesting topic because they hold the keys to the kingdom. Taiwan, this small island, have all this importance to certain ways of the world running. You can see why it'd be a big problem for the US to focus on.
U.S. military advisors have worked closely with the Taiwanese counterparts for years to prepare the nation for invasion. Despite threats from China, the flow of U.S. arms to Taiwan continues unabated, and recently U.S. President Joe Biden publicly voiced for the first time an unacknowledged truth in American politics. The United States will come to the defense of Taiwan in case of invasion. This greatly angered China, and the White House press corps was quick to walk the statement back. But what seemed like a political guffaw was likely yet another bit of intrigue meant to further the American strategy of
yeah, I mean, even if you say it's like an accident or whatever, then you know you're projecting something on purpose.
Keeping China guessing as to how the U.S. might react to an invasion. If China cannot accurately predict what America will do should it invade Taiwan, it serves to create confusion and doubt amongst Chinese leadership. Should China prepare its economy for a flurry of global sanctions like Russia received after its invasion of Ukraine? Or should China expect American F-18s to swarm the skies over Taiwan and sink their invasion fleet? Strategic ambiguity is a powerful tool, and political theater is an excellent method for creating it. But the U.S. is not planning on fighting a war against China alone. To this end, it has helped increase the capabilities of allies.
Australia and Japan. He did mention Japan before, but Australia too, okay.
Such as Japan, and most notably Australia, who recently signed a military cooperation pact between itself, the United States, and the United Kingdom. The pact will not just provide security cooperation between the United States, notably Australia, who recently signed a military cooperation pact between itself, the United States, and the United Kingdom. The pact will not just provide security cooperation between the countries, but also help arm Australia with a fleet of nuclear attack submarines. This is of grave concern to the Chinese, who recently attempted to charm Australia away from its relationship with the U.S., a tactic which ultimately failed. In 10 years' time, China might not have to face off just against the U.S. and British submarines, but Australian submarines also, putting the People's Liberation Navy as well as its all-important sea trade routes at increased risk. China imports most of its oil and gas over its seaborne trade routes, and this is exactly what the U.S. is preparing to target in case of war, in order to strangle the Chinese economy. Recently, security meetings between Japan, India, the U.S., and Australia were revived after a pause during President Trump's term. The Quad, as it's informally known, aims to tackle global problems such as global warming, cybersecurity, and ensuring a free and open trade environment in the Pacific. This is a veiled implication of the Quad's discussions on how to best handle China's expansion in the South Pacific. Currently, the Quad has no military commitment to each other, but that might change in the future as President Joe Biden makes the South Pacific and confronting China an area of pressing concern for the U.S. India is the only nation in the Quad without a formal security agreement with the U.S., and it has historically refused to sign on to any security partnerships with any nation.
That's quite interesting. I mean, I know there's a lot of hostilities between China and India, but then I think India are allies with Russia. I might be wrong, but I feel like that's the case. So they'll be kind of in a situation where they're like sort of split in between.
However, that may soon change as tensions between India and China escalate, and it becomes clear that India is not able to win a war against the superior Chinese military on its own. Bringing India into the network of security alliances in the South Pacific would effectively hem China in on all sides, and more importantly put Allied ships and planes directly in the path of China's trade routes through the Indian Ocean. But the United States is also taking very material steps to confronting China. War with China would be waged at sea and in the skies, with very little of any action between the People's Liberation Army and the U.S. Army. This will be a war of ships and planes, not of tanks and artillery, and the U.S. is preparing accordingly. In an attempt to prepare for a confrontation with China in the skies, the U.S. has accelerated the procurement of F-35s and made getting squadrons of the fifth-generation fighter into operational status a top priority. However, both the Navy and the Air Force have expressed reservations about the F-35's current readiness, which has prompted both the services to supplement orders of F-35s with orders of upgraded legacy aircraft, such as the F-15 Eagle for the U.S. Air Force and the F-18 Super Hornet for the U.S. Navy. To counter the threat of Chinese missiles, including its very vast arsenal of ballistic missiles capable of targeting U.S. ships far out at sea, the Navy has also begun to expand the number of Aegis-equipped vessels in its fleet. Starting in 2015, the Navy also began to work on undoing the strategy of carrier-based sea dominance that it's employed since the end of the Cold War. With the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. Navy enjoyed unmatched superiority and complete freedom of action anywhere in the world, and thus surface fleets were retasked with simply protecting carriers. Anti-submarine warfare and anti-surface warfare skills had atrophied as naval strategy centered completely around the big carriers. Now the U.S. Navy is preparing its crews to once again face off against near-peer foes in ship-to-ship battles. Submarines are America's second greatest naval asset after aircraft carriers, and yet remain nearly completely forgotten by most of the world.
I know submarines are very important, and I've done videos specifically on submarines where I've learned about the actual importance of what they do, but second most important thing about after aircraft carriers, that's a pretty big statement.
Which is exactly how they like it. Currently, the U.S. has a fleet of 68 submarines and is replacing the Cold War Los Angeles-class fast attack submarines with the new Virginia class. Investment in submarines has stalled recently and procurement plans are behind schedule, but the United States retains a significant advantage in undersea combat, despite China having a larger force of less advanced submarines. The realm of hypersonic missiles has received a great deal of attention ever since it was announced that the U.S. was lagging behind both Russia and China in their development. Yet there's some misinformation and confusion regarding this technology that's made Russia and China seem as if they hold a significant advantage over the U.S. in this realm, when they really don't. Firstly, any ballistic missile is hypersonic, and China's recent test that saw a hypersonic missile fly around the world is not very impressive from a military point of view. Technically speaking, this simply doesn't add any additional capability that didn't already exist. The real threat from hypersonic missiles comes from maneuverable hypersonics. These are missiles that can not only fly at hypersonic speeds, but can also maneuver while doing so, making them incredibly difficult to defend against. In this area, all three nations are still struggling to field fully operational missiles, but the U.S. has made great strides in recent tests. One area where the U.S. may in fact be coming up short is the development of advanced long-range air-to-air missiles. Recent photos of Chinese jets show that China has begun to field advanced beyond visual range missiles, while the U.S. is still largely equipped with the AIM-120, an extremely capable and combat-proven air-to-air missile that nevertheless is only effective at medium ranges. However, the Pentagon's F-3R program aims to improve the capabilities of American air-to-air missiles by not just greatly expanding their range, but also improving efficiency in an electronically contested environment. A new generation of American missiles will feature two-way data links, GPS-enhanced inertial measurement units, an expanded no-escape envelope to increase lethality, and improved high-angle off-bore sight capability, allowing pilots to fire missiles without their plane being pointed directly at the enemy, thus lowering their vulnerability. However, the next step for U.S. fighters is the AIM-260, which will feature beyond visual range capabilities and match longer-range opposition missiles while bringing the tried-and-true technologies of the AIM-120. But World War III will also likely involve action against Russia in Europe.
Okay, so now Europe's coming into it. It's been left out the whole video, which is pretty interesting because obviously you can include the Russia-Ukraine situation.
As China and Russia are both likely to cooperate in such a scenario. This will be a partnership of opportunity, however, not of choice, as relations between the nations are difficult at best, and Russia grows increasingly frustrated at its status as the junior partner. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Russian military has proven itself incompetent, corrupt, and inept at executing a modern 21st century war. Despite vastly superior firepower, the Russian offensive in Ukraine has all but stalled out. And this is with Russian forces facing a foe that has a fraction of the capabilities of the U.S. military. Simply put, the only real threat Russia can bring to a global war scenario is their nuclear power. With the bulk of the U.S. Army not taking part in operations in the Pacific, Russia would be easily contained by current U.S. ground firepower, while NATO would be short on critical air assets. These are capability gaps easily filled in by NATO air forces. 4 months ago, we would have spent an additional 10 minutes explaining to you how the US is preparing to counter Russia. Today, after seeing what the Russian military is capable of, we honestly don't have to. While victory would come at a cost, NATO would most likely win a resounding victory over the Russian armed forces. The only real threat Russia would pose would be in the first few weeks as the bulk of American firepower is being shipped across.
Also, the nuclear side, because I feel like Russia would just sort of get to the point where, like, or so I say Russia, Putin would get to the point where he's like, fuck it, we've lost, let's just destroy Europe, and they would just nuke all the major cities and stuff like that. Like, wouldn't be surprised, man. That's the scariest part.
The Atlantic and prepared for battle. This leaves the Baltics and Poland vulnerable, but the deployment of NATO rapid response forces would likely be enough to slow down an initial Russian offensive and greatly limit its gains until NATO's European partners can fully mobilize their own armies. U.S. strategy to counter Russian aggression in the next World War is thus based around preparing European partners to better defend their own continent and not be so reliant on the U.S. military, as the conflict against China will consume the bulk of U.S. sea and air power. The Pacific is where the real war will play out, and after its stunning losses in Ukraine, it's unlikely Russia would willingly engage NATO in a third world war anyway. Now go check out World War III hour
Well,
by...
that's a good way to end it, at least. I mean, yeah. Crazy. Obviously, it's not all set in stone. It's just like predictions and stuff. But it's interesting to see how it could possibly go and all that stuff. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this reaction. If you want more, let me know in the comments. Sorry for sniffling and coughing and stuff. I do feel pretty ill, but it is what it is, man. I've got to get back to doing the reactions, so you're gonna have to deal with it until I'm better. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. And until next time, like, subscribe, and peace.